One man sits alone inside a titanium capsule, sinking toward the deepest gash in the surface of this planet. Every expert who understood this place, including someone who had already been down there himself, told him the same thing. There's nothing down there, just a flat, dead plain, stretching out in the dark. But when his lights finally hit the bottom, everything he'd been told fell apart. The ground had texture, something was moving in the silt, and half buried in the mud was an object that had no business being there. This man went back to that same spot 15 times over 3 years. And piece by piece, what he found down there quietly unraveled almost everything we thought we understood about the deepest place on Earth. The Mariana Trench is the deepest scar cut into this planet's surface. It drops nearly 11,000 meters below the Pacific, past the island of Guam, down to a point called the Challenger Deep, a place where sunlight has never once reached in the entire history of the world. The water sits just above freezing. The pressure is crushing enough to collapse an unprotected human body in an instant. It's the weight of an entire ocean pressing straight down. For most of human history, we simply couldn't go there. So when we tried to picture what waited at the bottom, we imagined a flat, lifeless plain, cold mud, and nothing else. That assumption held for decades, unchallenged. Then one man went down to see it for himself, and kept going back until the whole picture came apart. His name was Victor Vescovo. Before the ocean ever entered his life, he had already built a heavy resume. He made his money in private equity, served as an officer in the US Navy, and climbed the highest peak on every continent, Everest included. He'd already completed the Explorer's Grand Slam, all 7 summits plus both poles. He had already stood on top of the world. The only direction left was straight down. So he commissioned a submarine built for a place that destroys machines. It was called the Limiting Factor, built by a Florida company named Triton, its crew capsule wrapped in titanium thick enough to hold back that pressure. And it was different from every deep submersible before it in one crucial way. Earlier subs made one trip to the very bottom and were essentially finished. This one was built to go back again and again. In the spring of 2019, as part of a mission to reach the deepest point of all 5 oceans, Vescovo took his sub down into the Challenger Deep. He reached almost 10,927 meters, the deepest dive any human had ever made. Edging past the record set back in 1960 by Don Walsh and Jacques Piccard. Before him, only 3 people in history had ever touched that bottom. One of those names belongs to filmmaker James Cameron, who had made the trip in 2012. But setting the record was never the point. 3 days after that first dive, he went straight back down. 4 dives to the bottom in 10 days. He wasn't there to plant a flag. He was there to look. And what Cameron had told him to expect was the opposite of what he found. Cameron had described the bottom as flat and featureless, a lifeless moonscape. When Vescovo got down there, the floor wasn't flat at all. Sensors on his sub, along with robotic landers his team dropped alongside him, mapped subtle ridges and rises across a bottom everyone had assumed was smooth. And it wasn't lifeless either. As Vescovo crisscrossed the seafloor in his lights, things were moving down there. Small, pale creatures, unlike anything familiar. His chief scientist, marine biologist Alan Jameson, later said the team believed they'd found 4 species entirely new to science: a shrimp-like crustacean called an amphipod, a spoonworm spotted around 7,000 meters, and a pink snailfish drifting calmly at roughly 8,000 meters, in water that should crush almost anything. Sea cucumbers sat quietly on the bottom. Colorful rocky outcrops hinted at possible chemical deposits. Every one of these animals was surviving in permanent darkness, near freezing water, crushing pressure, and almost no food. For a long time, biologists doubted anything complex could live under conditions like that. It clearly could. Cameron himself wasn't fully convinced. He publicly disputed the idea that Vescovo had gone deeper than his own dive, arguing the floor was so uniformly flat there was nowhere lower left to reach. That argument is still unresolved, but on two bigger questions, whether the floor had real shape and whether it held life, this trip had already answered him. Still, it was something else, half buried in the mud, that put this expedition on front pages worldwide. 4 hours into that dive, Vescovo spotted something that didn't belong. Reports described it as looking like a plastic bag, with what appeared to be candy wrappers nearby, sitting in the silt at the lowest point on the entire planet. But here's the honest part. Vescovo himself was never fully certain what it was. He later described it as a small, triangular object that looked like plastic, with what seemed to be lettering on it. He never retrieved it, and confirming it properly would have meant bringing it up, which the expedition didn't do. His team told reporters at the time that testing was still ongoing. What's certain is this: it was almost certainly something man-made, sitting at the most remote, least reachable spot on the entire planet. And this wasn't even the first time trash had turned up down there. By the count at the time, it was at least the third. It isn't hard to see how it gets there. The United Nations has estimated something like 100 million tons of plastic waste is already floating in the world's oceans. Deep trenches act like drains, collecting whatever eventually sinks, and when the science came back, it got worse. Jameson's team had been collecting those small amphipods from the bottom of several trenches and testing what was inside them. Across 6 different trenches, over 72% of the amphipods examined carried plastic particles in their bodies. But in the samples pulled specifically from the Mariana Trench, the number was 100%. Every single one. Species that hadn't even been named yet were already carrying our plastic inside them. We reached the bottom of the world, only to find it was already contaminated. You'd expect that to be the end of the story. One record, one grim discovery, and home. Instead, Vescovo kept going back. In 2020, he returned to the Challenger Deep with a larger team and a longer plan, bringing passengers down with him one at a time, into a place that had swallowed only a handful of humans in all of history. One of them was Kathy Sullivan, a former NASA astronaut and the first American woman to walk in space. When she reached the bottom, she became the first woman ever to see the Challenger Deep, and the first person alive to have been both in orbit and at the lowest point on the planet. Back on the surface ship, Sullivan and Vescovo made contact with astronauts aboard the International Space Station, more than 400 kilometers overhead. It was the first time anyone had linked the deepest place a human can reach with people living in orbit above it. Another passenger that year was Kelly Walsh, son of Don Walsh, the man who first touched this bottom back in 1960. 60 years later, the son descended into the same waters his father had opened up. Vescovo didn't stop there. He went back again in 2021 and again in 2022. By the end, Victor Vescovo had descended into the Challenger Deep around 15 times, more than anyone else who has ever lived. The first dive set the record. But it was the going back, over and over, that actually mattered. Each trip mapped a little more of the bottom, reached across all 3 separate basins that make up the Challenger Deep, and brought more scientists down to see it firsthand. Vescovo later said what he really hoped for wasn't a record at all. It was opening the door to exploring the deep ocean permanently, instead of treating it as somewhere you visit once in a lifetime and then forget. The record was never really the story. Going back was. That flat, dead plain we'd pictured for decades was never actually there. What's down there is ridged, cold, and quietly full of life we're only beginning to name. And it's already tangled up with the waste we've sent down without meaning to. Almost everything we now know about the deepest place on Earth, we know because one man refused to go there only once. There's still an entire world down there in the dark, that we've barely started to look at. And some of what's been pulled up from the deep since is even harder to sit with than a piece of plastic on the ocean floor.